The first day, you stop, not slow down. Stop. Close the thing that has been consuming the hours and open the thing that needs building. Sit with the discomfort of the transition. Feel the specific pullback toward the easier input, and then push through it anyway. What happens in your brain in that moment, and in the days and weeks that follow, is not what the motivation content tells you. It is not inspiration. It is not a transformation. It is a series of specific neurological events, running in sequence, that the brain does not advertise and nobody explains before you decide whether the first day is worth the discomfort it costs. This video explains the sequence, not to motivate you, to give you a map of what is happening inside the machine when it begins to run differently. Stephen Strange did not understand what was happening to him at Kamartaj until he understood the mechanism. The mechanism was not mystical. It was structural, specific changes in how the brain processed information, built capacity, and rewired its predictions about what was possible. Beat 1. Days 1 through 7. The resistance phase. Your brain runs the same mechanism. Here's what it does when you finally stop being lazy. Phase by phase, starting on day 1. The first week is the most neurologically honest phase of the transition. The brain is not pretending things are fine. It is reporting accurately what is happening, and what is happening is uncomfortable. The brain has built strong neural pathways around the behaviors that consumed the hours. Those pathways are not erased by a decision to stop. They are still present, still active, still producing the pull toward the habitual behavior. The discomfort of not following them is real. The restlessness, the difficulty concentrating on the new behavior, the sense that the effort is producing nothing. These are accurate reports from a brain whose existing pathways are being underused while new ones are being constructed. The new pathways require repetition to strengthen. In the first week, they are weak. The effort required to use them is genuinely higher than the effort required to use the established ones. This is not weakness. This is the biological cost of all neurological change. The brain does not rewire for free. The discomfort of the first week is the price of admission, and understanding that it is a phase, not a permanent condition, is the specific knowledge that most people who quit in week 1 did not have. Beat 2. Days 8 through 30. The construction phase. Something shifts between the first and second week that is not dramatic from the outside and is unmistakable from the inside. The new pathways have been used enough times to begin strengthening. The brain is beginning to predict the new behavior as the pattern rather than the exception. The pull toward the old behavior is still present. It does not disappear in 2 weeks, but it has begun to compete with an emerging pull in the other direction. The new behavior is beginning to produce its own neurochemical signals. The completion of the productive session fires a small but real reward. The reward is noticed. The brain begins anticipating the reward at the start of the session, rather than only after it. Stay with this. What I am about to describe is what happens between day 30 and day 90, and it is the phase that people who quit at 3 weeks never reach, and the people who reach it almost never return from. Strange's most significant neurological shift at Kamartaj did not happen on the day he first succeeded. It happened in the accumulation of weeks of practice, in the slow, invisible strengthening of pathways that eventually produced a brain that processed the demands of the new discipline as familiar rather than foreign. The brain was not the same brain that had arrived, not because of magic, because of what repeated effortful practice does to neural architecture over 30 days. The same mechanism is available to you. It runs on repetition, not on quality of motivation, on repetition alone. Beat 3, days 30 through 90, the identity phase. By day 30, the brain has crossed a threshold that most content about laziness never reaches far enough to describe. The new behavior is no longer primarily effortful. It is increasingly automatic, not in the sense that it requires no effort, but in the sense that it no longer requires the same daily recommitment that the first week required. The brain has reclassified the behavior from exception to pattern, from deviation from the default to the emerging default itself. What accompanies this reclassification is a change in how the self is described, internally, in the quiet language of identity that runs beneath conscious thought. The man who has completed 30 days of the new behavior does not primarily describe himself as someone trying to change. He describes himself as someone who does this. That identity shift is not cosmetic. It changes which subsequent behaviors feel consistent with who he is. And consistency with identity is a more durable driver of behavior than willpower will ever be. By day 90, the neural architecture has been rebuilt sufficiently. that the new behavior is the established pathway and the old one is the deviation. Not gone, still present, still occasionally producing the pull, but no longer the dominant architecture. The brain that began in the laziness pattern and has run 90 days of the new behavior is not the same brain, not metaphorically, structurally. The pathways that govern how it processes demands, anticipates rewards, and predicts what a day looks like have been rebuilt through 90 days of repetition into something that produces a different default behavior without requiring a different daily decision. You came into this expecting to be told what stopping laziness requires from you. More willpower, more motivation, more commitment applied harder against the pull toward ease. What it requires is time, specifically 90 days of repeated behavior, not perfect behavior, not heroic behavior, not behavior that feels good in the moment, just the behavior, repeated across 90 days while the brain completes the neural reconstruction that the repeated behavior triggers. The willpower required in week 1 is real and significant. The willpower required in week 12 is a fraction of what week 1 cost, because the architecture has changed and the new behavior is increasingly the path of least resistance rather than the path of most resistance. You do not have to be strong enough to maintain this forever. You have to be strong enough to maintain it for 90 days while the brain builds the architecture that makes it sustainable without the strength. The first day is the most expensive day. Not the most difficult day of the 90. The most expensive in terms of the neurological cost of initiating the new pathway against the pull of the established one. Tomorrow is the first day, not in the future, not when the conditions improve, not when the motivation arrives in sufficient quantity to make the cost feel manageable. Tomorrow, because the brain begins the 90-day reconstruction, the first time the new behavior happens, and every day before that first time is a day, the reconstruction does not run. Name the behavior tonight. One sentence. The specific daily action that the 90 days is built on. Write it before this video ends. Tomorrow morning, the first day runs. The resistance will be real. The pathways will pull toward the established direction. You will feel the discomfort of the new route being used for the first time. That discomfort is not evidence that the change is not working. It is the change working. The brain building the new pathway always feels like resistance at the construction site. Strange did not mistake the difficulty of the Kamartaj training for evidence that he was wrong to be there. He understood, eventually, that the difficulty was the mechanism. The discomfort is the mechanism. Let it run. The brain that stops being lazy on day 1 is not a different brain. It is the same brain running the same process that eventually produces a different brain. Start the process. The brain handles the rest across 90 days. One sentence. Tonight, the behavior, not the intention. Tomorrow is day 1. The 90 days begins when the first behavior happens, not when the decision to begin is made. Not when this video ends, not when the conditions feel right. When the first behavior happens, make that tomorrow. One question. What day are you on? If you have already started and are currently inside the 90 days, drop the day number. If you are starting tomorrow, drop day 1. The comments section is the accountability record. Your number is the behavior having happened. Drop it. If this made the neuroscience of stopping laziness legible, subscribe. More of this, the brain handles the rest. You just have to start the process.